Okay, so this week, Parasha talks about Shabbat, which is my favorite thing. And if you think about Shabbat sort of in cyclical time, because the Chagim, they revolve around the moon, but we actually reset the times so that they're always in the same season, because otherwise it would be like Pesach's this time and whatever. So we're resetting those. But if you think about Shabbat, it's consistent throughout time. And I always think about like Moshe Rabbeinu and these tzaddikim from back in the day, how when we're tapped into Shabbat and sort of cyclical time, we can tap into the energies almost that they were existing in. And as we progress, we're creating more technologies and all these distractions and just more and more and more, all these things to distract us. And the beauty of Shabbat is all of the things that we do to emulate Hashem and to create, we take a pause from that and we're actually meditating on being creations rather than this space of creating. And when we're doing that, we're actually literally tapping into this energy, the same sort of bechina of these avot from the beginning of time, because we're saying, okay, we've created all these things, but we're actually not going to interface, we're not going to interact with them, and we're going to go back to the simplicity, the tmimut, and that I think is the ikar, one of the most epic things of Shabbat, that we can kind of exist and imagine how it was, and we're still in this tradition, you know? And so Shabbat, I mean, there's two aspects. There's the one is like the resting of Shabbat, and the other is like we actually have to learn about Shabbat to be able to understand the rituals and be doing them. So there's those two aspects. And Shabbat's the only Jewish ritual mentioned in the 10 Commandments, and it's also the ritual mentioned in the Torah more than any other. So you see the importance of that. And the Hebrew word nofesh, resting, is related to nefesh. And we're reading that Hashem said to Moshe, saying, "And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, just observe my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me and you for generations, l'dorotam, to know that I am Hashem who sanctifies you." And Rashi adds, "And although I charged you and commanded you with the work of the Mishkan, don't view it so lightly as to push aside the Shabbat because of that work." So also just emphasizing that the Mishkan is super important, and you might think that it supersedes like Brit Milah you're doing, but no, Shabbat is of such importance that you have to rest even from the work with Mishkan. In the Shabbat prayer, it reads, "Rejoice in your kingdom, you who keep Shabbat." And in Talmud Shabbat, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moshe, "I have a precious gift in my treasure house," and it's called the Shabbat. And we really see this because, you know, it says the blessings come from Shabbat, and it's the time where you're working and you're able to actually just enjoy the fruits of your labor on Shabbat and take a break from that and realize it's not all about that. It's the ultimate emunah to see that, you know, like I'm taking this break, especially, you know, I always imagine, like I'll tell people trying to explain sort of my devotion to it is that, you know, the biggest artist can call me and tell me, I want you to come on tour with me, but you have to play Friday night, I'm going to give you $1 million. And for me, like, I'm like, it's an absolute no, like, because you have to have full emunah that Shabbat is keeping you with the blessings, and it's keeping you grounded, and it's keeping you connected to Hashem. Everything's in the hands of Hashem. Like, you could say yes to that, and then all of a sudden something, you know, chas v'shalom, really bad happens, or it doesn't work out, or whatever. And you could say no, and some other like massive, amazing blessing comes in. So you have to realize, like, you have to stick with your faith. And Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan, with l'dorotam, throughout the generations, alludes to dira, dwelling, meaning that you draw down Shabbat into the dwelling so that our physical space will feel the spiritual light of Shabbat. And we read the famous verse, "For in 6 days Hashem created the world." Rabbeinu teaches that can also be read, "For God made 6 days," meaning Hashem created time and the 6 days that concentrically encircle the inner focal point, the creation, which is Shabbat. Each day that is closer to Shabbat in time is also spiritually closer, which is also why human beings were created last, as we have the ability to elevate time and draw down the infinite light. And the 10 Commandments appear in the Torah 2 times. So the first is historically at Mount Sinai when Moshe's, you know, when we're getting the Torah, and then the next time is Moshe's review of the Exodus just before he passes away at the end in the 40 years in the desert in Dvarim. And so we read the first one, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." And the second version reads, "Guard the Sabbath day to keep it holy as God, your God, commanded you." So the second version is emphasizing that God commands it, but also saying that it's your God that commands you. So it's making it personal. And there's a similarity with this commandment to honoring one's parents. The first version reads, honor your father and your mother in order that your days be long and the land God, your God, is giving you. And the second version reads, honor your father and your mother as God, your God, commanded you in order that your days be long and in order that it be well with you, the land that your God is giving you. So the second version, both times, is really emphasizing our connection to Hashem and that it's your God, and it keeps repeating that. And that's kind of like the addition the second time. And the Arizal explains these two commandments as equivalent. One honoring your bodily, physical parents, and the other honoring your spiritual parents, the Zer Anpim and the Nukva, who are referred to as two Sabbaths. And the famous Chazal says, keep 2 Shabbatot, and that's, when the redemption will come. But the Arizal explains that it's not 2 Shabbatot in a row, it's actually the different aspects of Shabbat. So it's the Zer Anpim and the Nukva. So it's like the night and the day. And those are the two aspects in one Shabbat that we keep, and then it will happen. And Sefer Yetzirah writes about the 6 days of the week as being masculine and the 6 directions pointing outward, but the Shabbat is feminine, and it's the inner focal point that all the 6 points are drawing towards. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan says this teaches us that when we look at ourselves in terms of our external relationships, we're looking at the masculine identity. But when we look at our inner self, this is the feminine entity. And all week long, our struggle to gain spirituality is on a male level, but on Shabbat, we're on a female level, absorbing the fruits of the labor that we have done during the week. And without Shabbat, there would be no way of receiving. And we know with the female, they take the million sperm and choose one and fertilize it. And with this receiving, they give a complete infant, a complete life. So there's receiving, but what comes back is complete. And Rabbi Kaplan explains the masculinity is giving, but the essence of femininity is receiving and completing. So Shabbat is a weekly opportunity to complete a cycle and receive by enjoying the blessings that we earn throughout the week. And there's this epic quote from Mark Twain. I'll end on this, and he sort of poses this question. The quote is amazing. So he writes, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1/4 of 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jews ought hardly be heard of at all, but he is heard of. He has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine are also very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, and faded to the dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burnt out. And they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jews saw them, survived them all, and is now what he has always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his part, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? And Ahad Ha'am says, famously quoted, which I see as the answer to Mark Twain's question, which is, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat have kept the Jews. Shabbat Shalom.